Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 241 of CryptoBiography, and it is part 8 of the Isle of Bronze. And after a little hiatus last week, we are back to the story, and here we go. Let's get back to our chambers, Moaya suggested. Nasramin nodded, and he wheeled her back. He was lost in thought, and had half a thought to go wander in his garden again, when Moaya called him back from the door. "Put me in our bed, my love." "Of course." Nasramin went to her and picked her up in his arms. He walked quickly over to their bed and put her down. He was already turning to go when she said, "Love, wait." That popped him out of his reverie. "What is it?" "Stay in bed with me." "Oh, all right." He started to climb into bed. "Take your clothes off," she said. "Really?" he asked. "I'm not asking you, I'm telling you," she said. She smiled a bit even as she said it. She also started to take her own clothes off, though he knew it would be difficult for her in bed. He stripped down and helped her to strip down. They kissed, and he whispered in her ear, "I thought it hurts too much." "It does," she says. "We'll do other things instead." "You want that?" "I've wanted it for a long time." He pulled back and looked into her eyes. I know. And yes, for a while I didn't. But I want the closeness that I can only have with my husband. I've put this off because I know you've been preoccupied with the future of Limos, the future of our children and our people, and afterwards we can both go right back to worrying about Thebes and steel and unity searches. But we have some time before dinner. Let us spend it forgetting all else but one another. And they did. They were still in their bed when Dimethine came to their chamber door to let them know it was time to get ready for dinner. Nasramin helped Moaya redress, since her clothing was harder for her to get on, as well as more complicated. "I will not forget your lesson," he murmured in her ear. In reply, she reached up and ran her fingers through his hair at the back of his head. "Let's get to dinner," he said. The meal, like lunch, would take place in their family dining room. As it included Queen Callis and Theodora, certain formalities would have to be observed, including having Nasramin be the last to enter. Dimethine took care of such details, bringing them to the room last, while trying not to make guests wait long enough to become unhappy. He had so much experience in this, both personally and within his staff, that he almost always succeeded. Today was no different. As they entered, they could see that Queen Callis and Theodora, plus their children, were getting to know each other, but hadn't had time to do much more than say hello. "Please, let us be seated," Nasramin said. He sat, as he only did when guests were present, at the head of the table with Moaya at the far end. Queen Callis, as he suspected and even wanted, sat at his right, with Asasi at his left. Theodora sat next to her mother, with Shugo next to her, in a getting-to-know-you move. Across from Theodora, at Asasi's left, was Hama. This normally would leave an open space between Hama and Moaya, but it was cleverly minimized by Dimethine by slightly staggering the plates. They sat, and there were appetizers of fruit and cheeses which they started on. "I hope your time here on Limos is pleasant," he said to Callis. "Are your quarters to your liking?" This was a test, both of Callis's personality and the stance she wanted to take. "We are very comfortable," she said. Nasramin was pleased that she wasn't taking an aggressive stance. "Well, if anything isn't to your liking, please let us know, or any of our staff, and we'll see to it," he replied. "It must be a strange feeling to be away from home for such a long time." "We do what we must," Callis said. Theodora nodded slightly. "Do you have any activities you can do here?" he asked, directing the question at Theodora. "Singing, dancing, I play the lyre, and I sometimes sew," she replied. Hama nodded politely across from her, though Nasramin knew she enjoyed little of anything about those activities. She was the kind to go for a walk, or catch fish, or race her brothers, rather than anything like what Theodora described, except for sewing. Hama enjoyed sewing quite a bit. Perhaps that would be enough to get on with, he thought. Hama was also a deeply kind person, and would almost certainly put up a decent front for Theodora if she happened to not like her in the end. "And what would you like to do during your visit here, Queen Callis?" he asked. Get to know the Lyman lands and people, she replied. We will gladly help you in that, he said. Thank you, King Nasramin. But inside, he wasn't happy. Not that he expected any differently, but Callis was keeping him at a distance. He had no idea what her real desires were. Shugo and Theodora talked, but in a stilted, awkward way. Still, Nasramin thought it was a beginning. Not every relationship had to start with sparks, and, he added to himself, not every royal match had to have romantic love at all. Still, he wanted it for Shugo. The marrying of a prince could be done for gain, and had been done so, even here on Limos, where their customs were so different from the many other royal families around the Mediterranean. But he knew the pleasures, and the safety, and the help that a king could have by truly loving his wife. He did not want to give up on the possibility easily. But with luck, Theodora might be all of that. Or he would find a love elsewhere on their island, and this would come to a messy end. The dinner passed, and at the end Queen Callis asked for permission for her and Theodora to return to their quarters. Of course, Shugo and Kama, please escort them. Shugo and Kama got up without a word. The four of them left. Well, that was amusing, Father, Sasi said. With your permission, I will leave as well. Granted. Good night, son. Shugo nodded and left. Was that a successful meal? He asked Mawaya. Given that we don't have all the facts yet, I think it was as good as we can expect. Shugo certainly seems to be giving Theodora a fair shake. He nodded. And here I was worried that his pride or his determination to have a normal unity search would cause a problem. But then I don't think we're out of the woods yet. It wasn't exactly all sparks and moonbeams. No, it wasn't. We will see. The next day, Nasramin and Mawaya took Callis and Theodora, without their children, on a tour of the island. Nasramin did not much believe in riding in fancy wagons, but they did own one and used it that day. It took the whole day, from shortly after breakfast until nearly nightfall, to go the circumference of Limos, plus several places in the middle. Nasramin was careful not to get too close to their defenses during this tour, as he was not wanting to turn this into a scouting expedition for a possible invasion. However, he did allow them to see their tin mine. They were one of the only kingdoms to eschew slave labor. Instead, the miners were paid a wage, though the rare prisoner who was able-bodied also worked off their punishment in the mine. Queen Callis looked at it for a long time. It had no military importance, so Nasramin allowed her this. Finally, she said, I wasn't aware of any state that didn't use slaves somewhere. Oh, we might have to if we were on the mainland somewhere. But we have protected borders, and between our own agriculture and our fishing industry, we don't need to use slave labor, either to take care of our basic needs, or to make up for a population heavily engaged in warfare. So, we don't. And that's the end of the episode this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2022, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.